Her hands moved with a practiced grace that defied the frantic beat of her heart. Slender fingers stripped thorns from a blood-red rose, then gently nestled its head against the pure white throat of a lily. The bouquet was a study in contrasts, passion and innocence, danger and peace. It was perfect. It had to be. From behind the counter of her shop, petal and stem, Lily Jensen could see the vibrant chaos of Winwood painted on the walls across the street. Murals of impossible creatures and electric colors screamed life into the humid Miami air. Inside, however, the silence was a heavy blanket. No customers had come in all afternoon. The sweet, cloying scent of flowers felt less like a comfort and more like a countdown. Her phone buzzed against the wooden countertop, a furious, insistent vibration. She didn't have to look. She knew the number. Another creditor. She swiped the notification away, her stomach twisting into a familiar, tight knot. Her gaze flickered to the small stack of envelopes hidden beneath a catalog. Each one was stamped with a vicious red warning, "Final notice." This delivery was her last hope. A high-profile event at a waterfront mansion. The kind of client that could change everything, the kind of payment that could keep the wolves from her door for another month. She couldn't afford a single crushed petal. With the care of a surgeon, Lily wrapped the stems in silk ribbon and secured the finished arrangement in a transport vase. The bouquet was breathtaking. It was the best work she had ever done, fueled by a desperate, prayer-like focus. She carried it out of the shop, the little bell over the door chiming a lonely farewell. Her delivery van was old, the paint faded and chipped, but the engine always turned over. It was a relic from a life before this one, before she'd sunk every penny she had, and some she didn't, into a dream that was now threatening to drown her. She buckled the vase into the passenger seat as if it were a person, her knuckles white on the strap. "Just get us there," she whispered to the van, to the bouquet, to the universe. She pulled out into the street. The afternoon sun had surrendered to a bruised purple twilight, and a sudden shower slicked the asphalt, making the city's neon signs bleed into shimmering puddles on the ground. The colors of Winwood blurred past her window, a dizzying smear of art and light. Her eyes kept darting from the road to the passenger seat. The white lilies seemed to glow in the dim cab, a fragile beacon against the encroaching darkness. This bouquet wasn't just flowers. It was rent. It was electricity. It was one more day of her life. And as she drove toward the glittering heart of the city, she felt its delicate weight like it was the only thing holding her world together. The text message lit up her phone screen, a single, brutal sentence from the bank. "Overdraft warning, your account is now negative." A wave of nausea washed over Lily, cold and sharp. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the traffic lights into halos of red and green. She just had to get to the mansion. Just this one delivery. Her foot pressed down on the brake pedal as the light ahead turned red. Nothing. Her foot slammed down again, hitting the floor of the van with a useless thud. The pedal felt soft, dead. A choked sound escaped her throat. The van kept gliding forward on the slick asphalt, a terrible, unstoppable momentum carrying her toward the car idling in front of her. It was a Lamborghini. Blood-red and perfect, gleaming under the city lights like a drop of liquid ruby. The world slowed to a crawl. The sickening crunch of metal against metal was a sound she felt in her bones. Her body jolted forward, stopped only by the seatbelt that dug painfully into her shoulder. On the passenger seat the vase tipped. Water and glass and broken stems flew through the air. The perfect bouquet, her last hope, slammed against the dashboard. Red petals scattered like droplets of blood across the cracked vinyl. White lilies were crushed, their delicate scent filling the cab with the smell of a funeral. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the rhythmic swish of her windshield wipers and the frantic, hammering beat of her own heart. This was it. This was ruin. Then, the driver's door of the Lamborghini opened. Lily held her breath, expecting a monster to emerge, a man screaming with rage, his face twisted in fury. But the man who stepped out was the opposite of chaos. He was dressed in a dark suit that seemed to drink the neon light, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He moved with a chilling, predatory grace, his calm more terrifying than any anger could ever be. He glanced once at the crumpled back of his car, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then, his gaze lifted and locked onto her through the rain-streaked windshield. He started walking toward her van, his polished shoes making no sound on the wet pavement. Lily fumbled with her window handle, her hands shaking so badly she could barely make it work. The window rolled down with a squeal of protest. She had to say something. Apologize. Insurance. She had insurance, didn't she? Was it paid? He stopped beside her door, blocking out the rest of the world. He was close enough now that she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the dark intensity of his eyes. His gaze drifted from her pale, terrified face to the wreckage on her dashboard. He saw the scattered petals, the ruined lilies, the shattered hope. A slow, unnerving smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "I am so sorry," she stammered, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "My brakes, they just gave out." "I have insurance, I can call them, we can." He raised a hand, silencing her with a single, effortless gesture. He leaned closer, his voice a low, smooth rumble that cut through the sound of the rain. "Forget the money," he said, his eyes holding hers, pinning her in place. "Now you belong to me." This was not a police station. There were no harsh fluorescent lights, no smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. Lily found herself standing in a room that felt like it belonged in a different universe. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of Miami, a glittering carpet of lights stretching out to the black, endless ocean. The desk in front of her was a vast expanse of dark, polished wood, and the air tasted of money and power. She was still wearing her faded jeans and her simple green florist's apron, a smudge of dirt streaked across one cheek. She felt like a weed that had sprouted through a marble floor. Adrian Nash sat behind the desk, not looking at her. He was studying a thin file, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, each tick of a hidden clock amplifying the frantic thud of her own heart. She should say something, but her throat was tight with a fear so profound it had stolen her voice. Finally, he closed the file with a soft click. His dark eyes lifted and settled on her. They were just as intense here as they had been in the rain. "The damage to my car," he began, his voice a low, even tone that offered no comfort, "is estimated at $187,000. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. The number was so absurd, so astronomical, it didn't even feel real. It was a death sentence. I don't have that," she whispered, the words barely audible. "My insurance won't, no one could." He waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "I'm aware of your financial situation, Ms. Jensen. The overdrawn bank account. The final notices for pedal and stem. I know you can't pay me." A cold dread washed over her. He knew. How could he possibly know? He leaned forward, his hands lacing together on the desk. "So, we will arrange an alternative form of payment. I don't want your money. I want your talent." Lily stared at him, bewildered. "My talent? You're a florist," he said, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. "A very good one, from what I gather. My hospitality empire requires a certain aesthetic. You will provide it. You will be the exclusive florist for all my establishments. My nightclubs, my private events, my associates. Your shop will fulfill my orders, and only my orders. You will be on call, whenever I need you. That is how you will work off your debt." The initial shock gave way to a hot surge of defiance. He wasn't offering a job, he was claiming her life. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Absolutely not. My shop is my own. I'm not for sale." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the same chilling smile from the accident. "Everything has a price, Lily. You just crashed into yours. This isn't a negotiation." He stood up and walked around the desk, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the vast space. He stopped a few feet from her, his height making her feel small and fragile. "This is my only offer," he continued, his voice dropping lower, more personal. "You can accept it, and your shop stays open under my direction. Or you can refuse. And I will take you to court for the damages, a process that will bleed you dry, bankrupt your business, and leave you with absolutely nothing. The choice is yours. But I think we both know you don't really have one." He was right. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow, sickening certainty. He had her trapped. The crash, the debt, this impossible offer, it was a perfectly constructed cage, and she had flown right into it. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked from his unyielding face to the glittering city outside the window, a world of freedom that was no longer hers. "Fine," she choked out, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Adrian nodded, a flicker of dark satisfaction in his eyes. "Good. My assistant will be in touch tomorrow with your first assignment. Welcome to my world, florist." The Crimson Iris was not a place for flowers. It was a cavern of pulsing neon light, and shadows so deep they seemed to swallow sound. A low, rhythmic bass thrummed through the soles of Lily's shoes, a heartbeat for the soulless room. The air was thick with the scent of spilled liquor and expensive perfume, a cloying mix that fought against the clean, green fragrance of the flowers she carried in. Men in dark suits stood like statues in the corners, their eyes following her every move. She felt less like a florist and more like prey. She set up her workspace on a velvet-draped table in a cordoned-off section of the club, her buckets of flowers looking absurdly wholesome in the decadent gloom. Her instructions had been simple, arrangements for the main bar and each of the VIP booths. The theme? Dangerous beauty. Lily's hands, however, didn't shake. Here, with her flowers, she was in control. She chose the darkest red roses she had, their petals like velvet, and paired them with sharp, spiky eryngium that looked like tiny, frozen explosions. She worked quickly, her focus a shield against the intimidating atmosphere. She snipped stems with sharp, final clicks, stripped leaves with ruthless efficiency, and built her thorny masterpieces. She was so lost in her work that she didn't hear him approach. "Tell me, florist." The voice was a low rumble right behind her, so close she felt the vibration of it in her chest. Lily flinched, spinning around. Adrian stood there, having appeared from the shadows as if he were made of them. He was holding one of her roses, a perfect, blood-red specimen, pinched delicately between his thumb and forefinger. "What does a flower like this signify?" he murmured, his eyes fixed on the bloom. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that fought with the club's steady bass. "It can mean a lot of things," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Love. Passion." She met his gaze. "Or a warning." His lips curved into that same unnerving smile. "A warning." He ran his thumb over one of the thorns, a careless gesture that made her stomach clench. "That something so beautiful can still draw blood. That you should be careful what you reach for," she countered, her chin lifting slightly. His eyes flickered from the rose to her face, a dark, assessing look that made her feel stripped bare. He pulled a silver lighter from his pocket. The sound of it clicking open was sharp and loud in the space between them. A small, perfect flame danced to life, reflecting in his dark pupils like a captured star. He didn't light anything. He just held it there, the controlled fire a mirror of the man himself. Click. He snapped it shut. "You're not afraid of me," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I'm terrified," she admitted, the honesty of it surprising them both. "But my fear doesn't change the fact that I have a job to do." He took a step closer, and the air crackled. The space between them felt charged, electric. His scent, something clean and sharp, like gin and winter air, cut through the club's stale perfume. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She wanted to step back to run, but her feet were rooted to the floor. An unwelcome, traitorous warmth bloomed low in her belly. He raised the rose and lightly brushed the petals against her cheek. They were impossibly soft, a shocking contrast to his dangerous presence. Her breath hitched. "Good," he whispered, his voice a velvet threat. "Fear keeps you careful." And then he was gone. He stepped back into the shadows and vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving her alone with the throbbing music and the scent of roses. Lily finally let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hand rose to her cheek, where the ghost of his touch lingered. Her fingers were trembling. The last arrangement was for a private room tucked away in the back of the club, a secluded sanctuary of dark leather and polished chrome. It was quieter here, the relentless bass of the main floor muted to a distant, primal pulse. Lily was just placing the final thorny stem into the vase when she heard his voice from an adjoining office. The door cracked just enough for the sound to slip through. It was Adrian, his voice stripped of its usual smooth control. It was low, sharp, and laced with a cold fury. "Marco is getting bold," he hissed. "The shipment at the docks is vulnerable. I want eyes on it, 24/7. If he so much as breathes in that direction, you handle it. No mistakes." Lily froze, her hand hovering over a rose. The words slammed into her, each one a confirmation of the dangerous world she had stumbled into. Docks. Shipment. Marco. This wasn't business. This was something else entirely, something dark and illegal. She had heard too much. Her blood ran cold. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was the kind of knowledge that got people hurt. She forced her fingers to move, to adjust a leaf, her movements stiff and unnatural. She had to pretend she hadn't heard. She had to look busy, deaf, oblivious. The talking stopped. A heavy silence fell over the room, so absolute that she could hear the frantic drumming of her own heart. She kept her back to the office door, praying he would just leave, that he wouldn't even notice her. But she felt his presence before she saw him. A sudden drop in the room's temperature. A shift in the air. She slowly turned. Adrian was standing in the doorway, watching her. His face was a mask of cold calculation. There was no anger, just a quiet, terrifying intensity that was far worse. He knew. He knew she had heard. He closed the door behind him with a soft click, sealing them in together. He walked toward her, not with the predatory grace she'd seen before, but with a slow, deliberate purpose that made the hair on her arms stand up. She backed away instinctively, her retreat stopped by the edge of the console table. Her own floral arrangement was behind her, the thorns of the roses pressing into the small of her back through her thin apron. He didn't stop until he was inches from her, his large frame blocking out the dim light, trapping her in his shadow. His presence was overwhelming, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. "In my world," he began, his voice a low whisper that vibrated through her, "secrets are currency. And loose ends are liabilities." He told her a story then, not looking at her but at some distant point over her shoulder. It was a short, sharp story of a friend, a brother, who had sold him out for a rival's empty promise. The betrayal had nearly cost him everything. The pain was still there, a raw edge to his voice that he couldn't quite conceal. His eyes came back to hers, and they were black with the memory of it. "I learned a lesson that day. Loyalty is the only thing that has value. The only thing that keeps you alive." He leaned closer, bracing a hand on the wall beside her head. The scent of him, clean, sharp, dangerous, filled her senses. "What you see, what you hear, it belongs to me now too, Lily. Every secret you stumble upon is another chain binding you to me." His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second. "Loyalty is safety. Remember that." The threat was unmistakable, but beneath it, something else was happening. The fear twisting in her gut was mingling with a hot, traitorous current of attraction. His proximity was a dizzying assault, his intensity a magnet she was powerless to resist. Her breathing grew shallow. His face was so close now, his lips just a breath from hers. She saw his pupils dilate, saw the tight control in his jaw flicker. The world narrowed to the space between their mouths. He was going to kiss her. She knew it. And the most terrifying part was that she wanted him to. But at the very last second, he pulled back. With a strength of will that seemed to cost him something, he straightened up, breaking the spell. The denial was a physical blow, leaving her breathless and shaking. He looked down at her one last time, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked out of the room without another word, leaving her trapped between the wall and her beautiful, thorny creation. A new energy swept through the club, a palpable shift in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with the music. Lily felt it before she saw it, a prickle of unease on her skin. She was adjusting the roses on the main bar, trying to erase the memory of Adrian's face so close to hers, when a man walked in. He wasn't flanked by guards like Adrian, but he moved as if he owned the very air he breathed. He was handsome in a way that felt slick and polished, his suit a shade too bright, a diamond winking from his tie pin. He smiled at everyone, a wide, easy smile that didn't touch his cold, reptilian eyes. As he moved through the room, the men in suits who had been watching Lily now watched him, their bodies tensing with a new kind of alertness. Then Adrian was there, stepping out of the shadows as he always did. He met the newcomer in the center of the room. "Marco," Adrian said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Adrian." The man, Marco, replied, his voice smooth as honey. "Always a pleasure to see you in your element." He extended a hand. Their handshake was not a greeting. It was a silent war. Lily watched, frozen in place, as their knuckles went white. It was a contest of wills, a brief, brutal struggle for dominance played out in the open. It lasted only a few seconds before they released each other, smiling like sharks. Then Marco's eyes slid past Adrian and landed on her. His gaze was a physical thing, slow and invasive, as it traveled from her worn-out sneakers up to her flushed face. He saw the apron, the stray petal on her jeans, the way her hands clutched a pair of shears. "Well, well," Marco purred, taking a step toward the bar, toward her. "What's this? You've brought a wildflower into your den of thorns, Adrian." Lily's blood ran cold. He wasn't looking at the flowers. He was looking straight at her. He stopped at the bar and leaned in, pretending to admire her arrangement. The cloying scent of his cologne washed over her, making her stomach turn. "Such exquisite work," he murmured, his eyes still locked on hers. "So delicate. It must take a very gentle touch to handle something so beautiful without bruising it." The innuendo was thick and suffocating. She was the flower. She was the beautiful thing he was talking about bruising. She felt a desperate urge to hide, but there was nowhere to go. She was pinned by his predatory stare. Beside him, Adrian went perfectly still. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. His hand slipped into his pocket. Click. The sound was tiny, almost lost beneath the music, but to Lily it was as loud as a gunshot. The metallic snap of Adrian's silver lighter. He didn't open it. He just clicked the lid, a single, sharp expression of contained rage. Marco heard it. A slow, venomous smile spread across his face. He had gotten the reaction he wanted. He had poked the beast and found the tender spot. He finally broke eye contact with Lily, turning his smirk back to Adrian. "You always did have an eye for rare things," Marco said, his voice dripping with false admiration. "Just be careful. Pretty things are so easy to break." He gave Adrian a mock salute and turned, sauntering out of the club with the same oily confidence he'd entered with. The tension he left behind was a toxic fog, thick and choking. Lily finally let out a shaky breath, her knuckles white around the shears. She was no longer just a debtor working off a bill. She was a possession. A prize. A weakness for another man to exploit. Adrian never looked at her. He just stared at the empty doorway where Marco had disappeared, his hand still in his pocket, his thumb no doubt resting on the cool, hard silver of his lighter. The cage she was in hadn't just gotten smaller, she now knew there was a serpent inside it with her. The next morning, Adrian summoned her back to the penthouse. The view of the city was sharp and unforgiving in the bright sun, a stark contrast to the shadows that clung to the corners of his office. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply stood by the window, a dark silhouette against the brilliant blue sky. "I have a job for you," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of any warmth. A delivery. For Marco Velez. Lily's stomach plummeted. What kind of delivery? He turned, and his eyes were like chips of ice. An arrangement. Very specific. I want yellow carnations and orange lilies. Nothing else. The words hit her like a slap. As a florist, she knew the language he was speaking. It was a dialect of poison and spite. Yellow carnations meant disdain, rejection. Orange lilies screamed hatred and pride. This wasn't a gift. It was a beautifully arranged threat. A declaration of war delivered by her hand. You want me to take that to him? She asked, her voice a tight whisper. You are my florist, he stated, as if that explained everything. You will deliver it to his headquarters. Personally. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in her gut. He was using her. Using her as a pawn, a messenger to be shot. She was a message on a stem. The thought made her skin crawl. She wanted to scream, to refuse, to throw the words back in his face. But then she saw the look in his eyes. He was watching her, waiting for her to break. Daring her to. And a stubborn, fiery piece of her soul refused to give him the satisfaction. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. If she was going to be a pawn, she would be the most composed, defiant pawn he had ever seen. Fine, she said, her voice clear and cold. When does it need to be there? An hour later, she walked into the lobby of Marco's building carrying the floral insult. The bouquet was garish and loud, a clashing explosion of yellow and orange that was an offense to the eyes. It felt less like an arrangement, and more like a weapon in her hands. The building's interior was all gold leaf and black marble, so polished she could see her own terrified reflection in the floor. Men with thick necks and watchful eyes tracked her progress from the reception desk to the elevator. Marco's office was on the top floor. He was sitting behind a ridiculously large, glass-top desk, a smug smile on his face when she was shown in. The smile faltered when he saw the flowers. He rose slowly, his eyes narrowing on the bright, hateful colors. A gift? He asked, his voice a silky threat. From Adrian? A delivery, Lily corrected, her voice perfectly even. She walked forward and placed the heavy vase squarely in the center of his desk with a firm thud. Marco circled the desk, his eyes never leaving her face. He was trying to intimidate her, to see the fear he knew must be there. He picked one of the yellow carnations from the vase, twirling it between his fingers. Did he tell you what these mean, little flower? My job is to arrange the flowers, Mr. Velez, she replied, holding his gaze without flinching. What people see in them is their own business. Her calm professionalism seemed to throw him off. He had expected a trembling girl, not this cool defiance. He took a step closer, his slimy cologne invading her space. You're brave, he murmured, his voice dropping. Or stupid. Adrian is using you. He's putting you in the line of fire. You know that, don't you? I know I have a job to do, she said, refusing to back down. She held his gaze for one beat longer than necessary, a silent declaration that she was not as fragile as he thought. Then she turned with a crisp, deliberate movement. Have a nice day. She walked out of the office, her back straight, her head held high. She could feel his eyes, and the eyes of his men, burning into her back. She didn't look back. She didn't quicken her pace. She walked through the opulent lobby and out into the blinding Miami sun. Only when the glass doors slid shut behind her did she finally let out the breath she had been holding. Her legs felt like they might give out. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had walked into the lion's den and walked back out. It wasn't a victory. It was a chilling confirmation. She wasn't just in a cage anymore. She was part of the hunt. The delivery to Marco Velez changed something. In the days that followed, a wall of ice erected itself around Adrian Nash, and Lily was left shivering on the outside of it. He was no longer a silent, watchful presence. He was a critic. A ghost who would appear, find fault, and vanish, leaving a trail of cold fury in his wake. She was setting up an arrangement of white orchids in the lobby of one of his hotels when he appeared beside her. She hadn't even heard him approach. "They're wilting," he said, his voice flat. Lily touched a petal. It was firm and cool. "They were delivered this morning. They're fine. They look weak. The composition is unbalanced. Do it again." He didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked away, his dismissal a slap in the face. It happened again the next day at the Crimson Iris. He called the deep purple calla lilies she had chosen morbid, and the arrangement uninspired. Each word was a precise, calculated jab at the one thing she had left, her pride in her work. The fear she felt in his presence was slowly being replaced by a hot, simmering anger. This wasn't about flowers. It was punishment. She had enough. After he dismissed her latest creation with a cold, "This is not what I asked for," she ripped off her apron, threw it on the table, and followed him. He was already halfway to his private elevator, but her voice, sharp and clear, stopped him in his tracks. "Was that the point?" Adrian turned slowly, one eyebrow raised in a silent, dangerous question. Lily marched toward him, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. She didn't care about his guards or the cavernous silence of the club. "Sending me to Marco. Was I just a pawn? A message you sent on a stem?" His face was a mask of indifference, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. She was getting closer. "And now this," she continued, gesturing wildly back at her flowers. "You criticize my work, you treat me like I'm incompetent. Are you trying to push me away, or are you just enjoying the power trip?" He said nothing. He simply turned and entered his office, leaving the door open in a silent, challenging invitation. She didn't hesitate. She followed him in, the door clicking shut behind her with a heavy finality. He walked to the vast window, his back to her as he stared down at the sprawling city. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. "You don't understand the world you're in," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "Then explain it to me," she shot back, her voice trembling with frustration. "Because right now, all I understand is that you put my life in danger and now you're punishing me for it." He turned from the window, and for the first time, the mask was gone. His face was etched with a deep, weary tension. The coldness was a facade, hiding something raw and painful beneath. "The last person I let get close to me tried to destroy me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He knew where I was vulnerable because I let him see it. Proximity is a liability, Lily. A weakness an enemy will always exploit." Her anger deflated, replaced by a sudden, aching clarity. He wasn't punishing her. He was protecting himself. Protecting her. His cruelty was a shield, a clumsy, brutal attempt to create a distance he thought would keep her safe. The realization didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tragedy. He looked at her, and the gulf between them felt wider than the miles of city lights glittering outside the window. He had put her in danger, and his only solution was to push her into a different kind of isolation, one built of cold words and feigned indifference. The undeniable pull between them was still there, a live wire humming in the tense silence, but now it was tangled with this new, painful understanding. It was a connection that could only cause them both more harm. The cold war between them continued. Days bled into a week of strained silence and clipped, professional interactions. Lily worked like a machine, creating arrangements that were technically perfect but lacked the heart she usually poured into her craft. She felt hollowed out, the space between her and Adrian a gaping wound she didn't know how to close. He was a ghost in her life, a constant, unseen pressure that reminded her with every thorny rose and delicate lily that she was not her own. The shop, once her sanctuary, now felt like the beautiful, fragrant center of her cage. She was packing up her tools late one evening at the Crimson Iris when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered it anyway, a weary resignation settling over her. "My office." "Now." It was Adrian. The voice was not cold or critical. It was different. Taut. Urgent. The line went dead before she could respond. A new kind of dread, sharp and unfamiliar, twisted in her stomach. She drove to his penthouse, the city lights a blur outside her window. When she was shown into his office, the scene was not what she expected. He wasn't sitting behind his desk, a king on his throne. He was pacing in front of the massive window, a caged predator, his movements restless and charged with a raw energy that made the air in the room feel thin. He stopped when she entered, turning to face her. The mask of cool indifference was gone, replaced by an expression of grim intensity. "I had my mechanic look at your van," he said, his voice low and tight. There was no preamble, no explanation. Lily stared at him, confused. Her old van felt like a relic from another lifetime. "Why?" "I had it towed from the crash site to one of my warehouses," he continued, ignoring her question. "Something about your story, it didn't feel right." He took a step toward her, his eyes boring into hers. "Your brakes didn't fail, Lily." She frowned, a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "What are you talking about?" "My foot went to the floor. The brake line was cut," he said, the words dropping into the silent room like stones. "Cleanly. It was deliberate." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her mind reeled, struggling to process the information. Cut? Deliberate? The whole world shifted, the foundations of her reality cracking apart. The accident, the collision that had ruined her life and thrown her into this gilded cage, it wasn't her fault. It wasn't bad luck. It was an attack. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who would do that?" Adrian's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. All the coldness, all the distance he had manufactured between them for the past week, evaporated in an instant. It was replaced by something far more terrifying, a fierce, blazing protectiveness. "This wasn't random," he said, his voice a low growl. "It wasn't about you." He closed the remaining distance between them, his presence all-consuming. His hands came up to grip her shoulders, his touch firm, grounding. "Someone used you, Lily. They used you to get to me." She looked up into his dark, furious eyes and finally understood. The crash wasn't the beginning of her misfortune. It was a calculated move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. She wasn't a debtor who had stumbled into his path. She was a pawn, deliberately placed there. A weapon aimed at him. His words from that first night echoed in her mind, twisted into a horrifying new shape. "Now you belong to me." It had sounded like a claim of ownership. She realized now it was a statement of fact. Her fate had been tied to his long before she ever hit his car. She wasn't just trapped in his world. She was a target in it. The world was still tilting, a sickening lurch of unreality. Adrian's hands were a firm, grounding weight on her shoulders, the only things keeping her anchored. His words echoed in the silent, opulent room. "Someone used you to get to me." The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but something new was crystallizing around it, a sharp, jagged shard of anger. Someone had tried to kill her. They had treated her life as a chess piece, a disposable pawn in a game she didn't even know existed. The power dynamic in the room shifted. He wasn't her captor anymore. He was the target, and she was the bait that had been used. He let go of her shoulders and began to pace again, but this time his energy was focused, a coiled spring of deadly intent. "Marco." He bit out, the name a curse on his lips. "This has his stink all over it. He's not smart enough for a direct attack, but he's vicious enough to use an innocent person as a weapon." He stopped and turned to her, his eyes narrowed with a new kind of intensity. It wasn't possessive, it was strategic. "Think, Lily. Who from your life would have a reason to hurt you? Who knows your routine, your van, your financial trouble?" Someone had to give him the opening. Her mind raced, a chaotic flipbook of faces from her past. Creditors, suppliers, disgruntled customers. "No one," she said, shaking her head. "My life, it wasn't like this. It was just flowers and bills. No one would. Everyone has enemies." Adrian cut in, His voice sharp. Think smaller. A grudge. Someone you fired? Someone who felt you cheated them. His words snagged on a memory. A bitter, unpleasant one she had tried to bury along with her first failed business attempt years ago. There was an employee, she said slowly, the image forming in her mind. His name was Leo. I had to let him go. He was stealing from the register. The memory of the confrontation was still vivid, his sneering face, the threats he'd muttered under his breath as he left. He said I'd regret it. That I'd get what was coming to me. Adrian went still, his focus locking onto her. Leo, he repeated, testing the name. That's a start. But how would a petty thief connect with Marco Velez? Lily's breath caught in her throat. Another memory surfaced, more recent this time, a meaningless detail she had dismissed at the time. I saw him, she whispered, her eyes widening with the sickening realization. A few weeks ago, before the accident. He was across the street from my shop. He was talking to someone. Who? Adrian pressed, taking a step closer. The image sharpened in her mind's eye. A man in a cheap suit, leaning against the graffiti-covered wall, laughing with Leo. A man whose face she had seen before. One of Marco's men. She breathed, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. I saw him at the Crimson Iris the other night, standing near Marco's table. A dangerous light ignited in Adrian's eyes. This was it. The missing link. The thread that connected her broken past to his violent present. Lily was no longer just a victim. She was the key. Her memory, her past, her failed business, it was all part of the puzzle. The hollow feeling of being a helpless pawn was replaced by a surge of fierce, terrifying purpose. She had given him the weapon he needed. The air between them was no longer charged with attraction or fear, but with the electric hum of a shared hunt. He looked at her now not as a fragile florist or a debt to be collected, but as an unwilling ally, an unexpected asset. For the first time since she had crashed into his perfect red car, she felt a sliver of power. It was a terrifying, exhilarating thing. Leo, Adrian said again, his voice a low, satisfied growl. Tell me everything you know about him. The bar's sign, a giant pink flamingo with a faulty wing, flickered erratically, bathing the wet pavement in strobes of garish pink light. Lily felt the cold metal of the microphone taped against her skin, an alien presence beneath her simple cotton shirt. It was a constant, chilling reminder of what she was about to do. He's inside, Adrian's voice said, a low, disembodied rumble from the tiny earpiece tucked into her ear. He's at a booth in the back, on the right. She stood beside the open door of his black sedan, hidden in the shadows of an alley across the street. Adrian was a dark shape in the driver's seat, his face illuminated only by the faint glow of a small screen showing a grainy feed from the bar's security cameras. He hadn't touched her, but his intensity was a physical force, wrapping around her. Just get him talking, he commanded, his voice tight. Lead him there. Let his ego do the rest. We'll hear everything. The second you have what we need, or the second you feel like you're in trouble, you use the safe word. The safe word was Lily's. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. I know, she said, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. He finally looked away from the screen and met her eyes. The cold, calculating mask was gone, replaced by a raw, unvarnished concern that stole her breath. Don't be a hero, Lily. We are right here. I am right here. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. She had to trust he would keep it. She gave him a single, sharp nod, then turned and walked out of the alley and into the flickering pink light. The bar was an assault on the senses. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and cheap perfume, and a thumping bass vibrated up through the soles of her shoes. She pushed through the small crowd, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every nerve was screaming at her to turn around, to run back to the safety of Adrian's car. But she kept walking. She saw him. Leo. He looked older, his face puffy and his eyes holding a familiar, resentful glint. He was nursing a beer, his gaze sweeping across the room with the bored arrogance she remembered so well. She took a deep breath and walked toward his booth. "Leo?" His head snapped up. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "Lily Jensen? What the hell are you doing here?" She forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as brittle as it felt. "I was in the neighborhood. Mind if I sit?" He shrugged, a gesture of grudging acceptance. She slid into the worn vinyl seat opposite him. For a moment, they just stared at each other over the sticky table. "Heard about your bad luck," Leo sneered, a cruel twist to his lips. "Crashed your little flower van. Lost everything. Guess you got what was coming to you after all." This was her opening. She leaned forward, lowering her voice, forcing a note of desperate conspiracy into it. "It wasn't bad luck, Leo. And I didn't lose everything. I got a payout. A big one. The kind of payout that makes you realize you were playing in the wrong league." Greed flickered in his eyes, bright and ugly. It was just as Adrian predicted. "What are you talking about?" he asked, leaning closer. "I'm talking about the man I hit," she whispered, her heart hammering. "He was impressed. He saw a certain potential. He paid me for the trouble. Paid me very well." She let the lie hang in the air, glittering and tempting. "He's always looking for people who know how to make things happen. People who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty for the right price." Leo's suspicion was being swallowed by his avarice. He was hooked. She could see him calculating, connecting the dots. "So," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, her gaze locked on his. "I have to ask. How much did Marco Velez pay you to cut my brake line?" Leo's face went pale, then flushed a blotchy, angry red. "You're crazy," he spat, but his eyes darted toward the door, a cornered rat looking for an escape. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" Lily leaned in further, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that carried nothing but ice. "Because my new associate, he's very interested in talented people. But he hates loose ends. He hates being lied to. He already knows Marco was behind it, Leo. He just wants to know who the artist was. He respects the work." The lie felt slick and ugly in her mouth, but she pushed on, her gaze unwavering. "He'll pay more than Marco did. A lot more. For your loyalty." For a second, there was only the thumping bass of the bar and the frantic beat of her own heart. She could hear the faint, steady sound of Adrian's breathing in her ear, a silent presence that gave her the strength to hold the bluff. Leo's greedy, resentful mind did the work for her. The thought of more money, of one-upping Marco, of finally getting the respect he thought he deserved, was too much to resist. His bravado crumbled. 10 grand? He mumbled, the confession rushing out of him now. "That's what Velez paid me. 10 grand to snip a wire. He said it would just be a fender bender. A way to get some rich guy's attention. He said no one would get hurt." He looked at her, a pathetic, whining edge to his voice. "I needed the money, Lily. You ruined me when you fired me." The words were a clean, perfect recording. A confession. She had it. A wave of dizzying relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her slump in her seat. Just as she was about to say the safe word, Leo's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, terrified gray. His eyes shot up, wide with panic, and looked past her shoulder toward the bar's entrance. Lily didn't need to turn around. She felt the shift in the room. 2 large men in dark jackets had just walked in. They didn't look like they were here for a beer. Their eyes scanned the room and landed, with unnerving speed, on their booth. "He knows," Leo whispered, his voice shaking. "They're his men. He knew you were coming." The trap had closed, but she was the one inside it with the bait. The men started moving toward them, their pace deliberate, their purpose clear. Lily's blood ran to ice. Her mouth went dry. "Lily's," she breathed, the word a desperate prayer into the microphone. Before the men had taken 3 steps, the front door of the bar burst open with explosive force. 2 of Adrian's men, dressed as civilians, moved in with a speed that was brutally efficient. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. One of Marco's men was slammed against the bar before he could even reach for a weapon. The other was met with a fist that sent him stumbling back into a table with a crash of glass and splintering wood. A hand clamped down on Lily's arm. She flinched, but it was a different man, one of Adrian's, his face grim and focused. This way. Now. He pulled her from the booth, half dragging her through a back exit she hadn't even known was there. The noise of the fight was cut off as the door slammed shut behind them, plunging them into the sudden, shocking quiet of a rain-slicked alley. The black sedan was waiting, its engine a low, rumbling growl. The back door was thrown open and she was pushed inside. Adrian was in the driver's seat. He didn't look at her. His eyes were on the rearview mirror, his jaw a hard, unforgiving line of granite. The car shot backward out of the alley, tires squealing on the wet asphalt, before lurching forward and accelerating into the Miami night. They sped through the neon-lit streets, the city a blur of bleeding color outside the windows. Lily was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in her hands and spread through her entire body. The adrenaline was a wild, screaming thing in her veins. She could still feel the phantom grip of Marco's men approaching, the icy certainty that she was about to die. Adrian took a sharp turn, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He said nothing until they were on a quiet, tree-lined street, the chaos of the city left behind them. He pulled the car to a sudden stop under the dim glow of a streetlight. In the ringing silence, he finally turned to her. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions, fury, relief, and something else, something deeper and more volatile that she couldn't name. "Are you hurt?" His voice was a low, rough rasp. She shook her head, unable to form words. That was all it took. The dam of his control broke. He moved across the center console in a single, fluid motion. One of his hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, while the other cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek in a gesture that was both rough and tender. And then his mouth was on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. Possessive. A collision of fear and relief and every unspoken thing that had crackled between them for weeks. It was the taste of the rain and the night and the raw, unvarnished truth. He kissed her like he was laying a claim, like he was erasing the memory of the bar, like he was staking his flag on the one piece of territory he had almost lost. Lily's hands came up, her fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his suit jacket, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to swallow her whole. She kissed him back with the same wild, desperate energy, a silent scream of survival and terror and a terrifying, undeniable need. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. The hard lines of his face had softened, the walls he kept so carefully constructed now nothing but rubble around them. All pretense was gone. The game was over. The debt, the arrangement, the florist and the Mafia boss, all of it had been burned away in the heat of that kiss, leaving only the two of them, raw and exposed, in the quiet darkness of the car. The kiss had shattered the world, and this was what was left in the wreckage, a raw, charged silence in the confines of the car. Adrian drove, his hands steady on the wheel, but the calm was a lie. Lily could feel the rage humming off him, a tightly controlled inferno directed not at her, but at the man who had put her in danger. His knuckles were white. "I have the recording," he said, his voice a low, gravelly thing that scraped against the quiet. "Leo's confession. It's enough. I've arranged a meeting with Marco." A cold dread trickled down her spine, chilling the warmth left by his touch. "When?" "Tonight." He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the road, on the mission ahead. "I'm ending this. For good." He pulled the car into the underground garage of his building, the engine's rumble echoing off the concrete walls. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He finally turned to her, his face a mask of grim determination. "You will stay here. In the penthouse. You will lock the door, and you will not open it for anyone but me. Is that clear?" The words were in order, the same tone he had used when she was just a florist who owed him an impossible debt. But everything was different now. The fear was still there, a familiar ghost in her veins, but it was crowded out by a fierce, blazing anger. She wasn't a fragile flower to be hidden away in a vase while he fought her battles. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between them with the weight of a stone. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "This is not a negotiation, Lily." "He tried to kill me," she said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by the memory of the bar, of Leo's confession, of the cold dread she felt when she saw Marco's men. "He used my shop, my debt, my life to get to you. He made this personal. This is my fight, too. It's too dangerous." He bit out, his control fraying. "You have no idea what he's capable of." "I think I have a pretty good idea," she shot back, her own anger rising to meet his. "I was the one he used as bait. I was the one who sat across from that pathetic coward and got him to confess. I am not going to hide in your tower while you handle a mess I'm in the middle of. I am going to see this through. I am going to be there when you face him." They stared at each other, a silent, furious battle of wills. He was trying to protect her, to lock her back in the gilded cage he thought was safe. But she had changed. The girl who had crashed her van into his car was gone. In her place was a woman who had walked into the lion's den and was ready to do it again. He saw it in her eyes. He had to. The steel that had been forged in fear and adrenaline. He finally broke, letting out a harsh, frustrated breath. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the first crack in his perfect, impenetrable armor she had ever seen. "Fine," he growled, the word torn from him. "Fine. You come. But you will stay in the car. You will not get out. You will do exactly as I say, without question. If you don't, I will drag you back here myself." She gave a single, sharp nod, her heart hammering with a terrifying mix of fear and triumph. The drive was tense, the city lights giving way to the dark, empty stretch of road that led to the coast. A storm was rolling in off the ocean, the sky a bruised, angry purple. The wind whipped against the car, and the first heavy drops of rain began to splatter against the windshield like thrown gravel. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Adrian pulled off the main road and onto a dirt track that ended at a long, abandoned pier. The old wooden structure jutted out into a churning, slate-gray sea, waves crashing violently against its decaying pylons. It was a place for endings. At the far end of the pier, a single pair of headlights cut through the gloom. Marco was already there. Adrian killed the engine, and the only sounds were the howling wind and the roar of the angry ocean. The storm was here. The car door slammed shut, a hollow boom against the roar of the wind. Lily watched Adrian step out into the storm. Rain immediately plastered his dark hair to his skull and soaked the shoulders of his suit, but he didn't seem to notice. He was a creature of the storm, his silhouette a hard, unyielding line against the churning gray sky. He walked down the pier without a backward glance, each step a deliberate, final punctuation mark. From the relative safety of the car, Lily's world narrowed to the two figures at the end of the pier, illuminated by the lonely headlights of Marco's car. She couldn't hear their words, the wind stole them, but she could read the language of their bodies. Marco, posturing and arrogant. Adrian, perfectly still, a coiled spring of violence. Then it happened. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Adrian moved with a speed that was a blur in the driving rain. A single, brutal motion sent Marco to his knees. His men, who had been lurking like shadows, moved to intervene, but they were met by two figures who seemed to materialize from the storm itself, Adrian's men. It was over in seconds. Swift, silent, and absolute. Marco was disarmed, defeated, his power broken on the wet, splintering wood of the pier. The external threat was gone. A wave of dizzying relief washed over Lily, so potent it left her breathless. It was over. But Adrian didn't come back to the car. He stood over his vanquished rival for a moment before turning. He looked down the long stretch of the pier, his gaze finding the car, finding her. He just stood there in the wind and the rain, waiting. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The real fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Her hand, trembling, found the door handle. The second she pushed it open, the storm slammed into her, a physical assault of wind and water. It ripped at her clothes and tore the breath from her lungs. Every step she took down the pier was a battle, the wood slick and treacherous beneath her feet, the ocean roaring below like a hungry beast. She kept her eyes fixed on him, a dark statue at the end of the world. When she finally reached him, she had to shout to be heard over the wind. "It's done! He's gone!" Adrian said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the gale. He didn't look at the pathetic scene of Marco being hauled away by his men. His eyes, blazing with victory and a fierce, possessive fire, were only on her. He took a step closer, his presence a shield against the storm. "It's over. He can't hurt you. Now you are safe." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her rain-soaked skin. The gesture was tender, yet it felt like he was branding her. "You will be with me, completely," he said, his voice dropping, intense and absolute. "I will give you everything. A new shop, a new life, anything you want. But you will belong to me." The words hung in the air, a perfect, glittering cage offered as a reward. Safety. Security. An end to the fear. A part of her, small and exhausted, wanted to collapse into it, to let him own her, to let him handle the storms. But she looked into his eyes and saw not just protection, but possession. She saw the end of Lily Jensen. She found a strength she didn't know she had, a bedrock of defiance deep in her soul. She pulled her head back from his touch. No. The word was small against the storm, but it hit him like a physical blow. Confusion, then disbelief, flickered across his face. "I will not be owned, Adrian," she said, her voice stronger now, clearer, carried by the wind. "Not by debt, and not by you." The rain streamed down her face, mingling with the tears she didn't realize she was crying. "I didn't fight my way through all of this just to trade one cage for another." The victory in his eyes died, replaced by a raw, wounded darkness. He had won his war, only to be faced with a choice he never anticipated. He could have the prize, or he could have the woman. He couldn't have both. The storm raged around them, a perfect mirror for the ruin that had just crashed down between them. His face was a canvas of shattered pride. The possessive fire in his eyes died, leaving behind a cold, dark void of disbelief. He had offered her the world, his world, and she had thrown it back at him. For a moment she thought he might grab her, force her, prove that his will was stronger than hers. But he didn't move. He just stared at her, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, looking utterly, devastatingly lost. The heartbreak was a physical thing, a shard of ice in her chest. Turning away from him was the hardest thing she had ever done. Every instinct screamed at her to stay, to take the safety he offered, to fall into the dark, magnetic pull of his world. But she couldn't. She turned her back on him and started the long, lonely walk down the pier. The wind fought her, a furious, invisible force trying to push her back into his arms. The waves crashed below, their roar a symphony of her own broken heart. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she knew she would falter. So she kept her eyes fixed on the distant shore, on the small, worn-out van that represented her messy, difficult, and now undeniably hers, freedom. Weeks passed. The storm on the pier receded, leaving behind a quiet, gray reality. Lily was back in her shop. She threw herself into her work with a frantic energy, her hands constantly moving, stripping thorns, wrapping stems, building bouquets that were more beautiful than ever before. The scent of roses and lilies was a constant, bittersweet reminder. The shop was her sanctuary again, but a lonely one. The financial struggle returned with a quiet, creeping certainty. The red-stamped envelopes began to reappear under the counter. The phone calls from creditors started up again. Some days the weight of her choice was so heavy it threatened to crush her. She had walked away from a life of absolute security, and for what? For the right to worry about her electricity bill. for the dignity of her own debt. But as she stood in the middle of her small shop, surrounded by the life she had built with her own 2 hands, she felt a profound sense of self-possession. She wasn't a pawn. She wasn't a possession. She was just Lily Jensen, a florist who was struggling. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Still, a shadow lingered. The original debt, the one for the ruined Lamborghini, was never settled. It hung over her, an invisible sword. Every time a dark, expensive-looking car slowed down as it passed her shop, her heart would leap into her throat. Her body would tense, her hands freezing over a half-finished arrangement. She would wait, her breath held, expecting him to walk through the door, his face a cold mask, ready to finally collect what he was owed. A black sedan would pull up to the curb, and she would flinch, bracing for the confrontation. A man in a suit would get out, and her blood would run cold. But he would just walk into the coffee shop next door. The car would drive away. It happened again and again. Each time, the wave of fear was followed by a confusing, hollow relief. He was leaving her alone. He was respecting her choice. But the constant waiting was a prison of its own. She was free, but she wasn't free of him. Not completely. The unsettled debt was a chain, invisible and silent, that still connected them across the city. And every day, she waited for him to pull on it. But no one ever came. 6 months passed. The shop bloomed. It was no longer a quiet, desperate place but a vibrant hub of life and color. The bell over the door chimed constantly, announcing customers who came for Lily's artistry, their faces bright with talk of weddings and birthdays and simple, beautiful gestures. She hired a part-time assistant. The space beneath her counter was no longer a graveyard for final notices, but a home for seed catalogs and ribbon spools. She was still just a florist, but she was a florist who was surviving. Thriving, even. She was doing it on her own terms. The mail came on a Tuesday, a day so bright and ordinary it felt immune to surprises. Tucked between a utility bill and an advertisement for floral foam was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was from the bank. The big one. The one whose calls she had learned to ignore with a practiced, stomach-churning dread. Her hands, dusted with pollen, stilled over a bucket of fresh eucalyptus. Old fear, a cold and familiar ghost, pricked at her skin. She slit the envelope open with a stem cutter, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat. She pulled out the letter, her eyes scanning the dense, formal text. She read it once, her mind refusing to grasp the words. She read it again. We are pleased to inform you that the outstanding balance on your business loan has been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. Your account is now closed with a zero balance. The letter slipped from her numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. Paid in full. Anonymous benefactor. The numbers swam in her vision, a debt so impossibly large it had been a mountain she was prepared to spend her life climbing, and it was just gone. She sank onto a stool, the scent of 1,000 flowers suddenly overwhelming. There was no mystery. No question. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, a place where the memory of a desperate kiss in a dark car still lived. Adrian. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over her. Relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from her chest. A flicker of anger at his interference, at his inability to just let her be. And beneath it all, a deep, aching gratitude that was so painful it felt like grief. He had done it. He had paid her debt, the real one, but he hadn't come to claim her. He had left her shop, her name, her dignity, completely untouched. He had honored her choice. He had set her free. That evening, as the last of the golden light faded from the windward streets, she began to close up. She swept scattered petals from the floor, her movements slow and thoughtful. The day's revelation had settled into a quiet, bittersweet peace. The final chain was broken. She walked to the front door, keys in hand, ready to lock up and go home to a life that was finally, truly, her own. That's when she saw it. Across the street, parked in the deep blue twilight, was a blood-red Lamborghini. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart didn't pound with fear. It gave a single, painful thud. He was there, a dark silhouette behind the wheel, the car a silent, gleaming predator at rest. He wasn't there to collect. He wasn't there to claim. He was just watching. She stood frozen in the doorway, the keys cold in her palm. The whole world seemed to fade away, leaving only the space between her shop and his car. He must have seen her, because his head lifted. Through the windshield, across the street, their eyes met. The look in his gaze was not the one she remembered. The fire of possession, the cold calculation, the raw hunger, it was all gone. In its place was something she never thought she would see. A deep, aching respect. It was the look of a man who had finally learned the difference between owning a thing of beauty and letting it grow. He gave her a single, solemn nod. It was an apology. It was an acknowledgement. It was a goodbye. Then, the engine rumbled to life, a low, powerful sound that vibrated through the soles of her shoes. The red car pulled away from the curb and merged seamlessly into the flow of Miami traffic, its taillights shrinking until they were just two more sparks in the city of a million lights. Lily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked down at her hand. She was still holding a single, perfect white lily she had been meaning to take home. She stood there in the doorway of her shop, the cool night air on her face, and held the flower up slightly, a silent answer to his silent farewell. She was free. And in letting her go, he had found his own way out of the cage. If you enjoyed the video, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.